Awesome. We will get started. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Um, Welcome. It's a pleasure to be here. This is our first event of the year. So a bit of a belated Happy New Year. And I hope it's gotten off to a great start. We're really excited to show you what we've been building. And yeah, let's get this started. Hi, I'm Vignesh. I'm a product marketing manager. I work with the automation suite of products here at BrowserStack. And I used to be a DevOps engineer, and then here I am in marketing. But I still get to work with great folks like Ali here, who's a product manager. Ali, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, Vignesh. Thanks for the kind intro. Hi, everyone. My name is Ali. I am a product manager here at BrowserStack. I am a designer and engineer turned product manager. So again, something different out there. I was part of the team that built out the BrowserStack SDK, and that's what we're here to talk to you about.
Awesome. Thanks, Ali. So before we get started, let's just do a quick poll. We'd love to know who's joining us today and get to know you a bit better. So pull out your phones or your web browser and yeah, join the Slido link, and you can enter in the number on screen, or you can scan the QR code. Let's see what pops up.
Also, if you have questions, request you to add them into the Q&A button in Zoom so we can track and answer the questions accordingly.
Lovely. Looks like SDETs and Q engineers are here in full strength. But it's awesome. It's great to see that we've got a mix of different people, and I'm sure we're gonna have a lot of different perspectives on what we're gonna talk about today. And I'm hoping that the Q&A will be that lively as well. And yeah, just as Ali mentioned, keep dropping your questions in the Q&A box, and we'd be happy to answer them. I think things have this slide a fair bit of time. But this is amazing. It just goes to show all the different people that are part of our community, and thank you for joining us. Another question, what test framework do you use at your organization? Because this is another thing, right? So many different technologies available out there. So we'd love to know, what are you using? See a bit of Robot, Appium, WebDriver IO. Love it, love it. There's so many answers flowing in. Awesome. Well, I think this has been great. I hope for you this has been interesting as well, just to see the different kind of audiences that are out there. And we're hoping that you'll all bring in nice questions, like I mentioned, and we'll get the show on the road. So a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. Today's session will run for approximately 60 minutes. And we'll have a dedicated 15 minutes of Q&A at the end of that 16 minutes. So about 45 minutes for the presentation and then 15 minutes for Q&A. Please use the Zoom Q&A window to send in your questions. We'd love to hear and answer your questions. This session is being recorded, so you can feel free to just sit back and enjoy it. We will reach out to you after the webinar to send over a recording so you can watch this over and over. And I'm hoping it's worth watching over and over. So with that, a bit about BrowserStack. BrowserStack is the world's leading software testing platform. We were founded in 2011 by Ritesh Arora and Nakul Agarwal, and quickly grew to 1,000 customers. We've launched multiple products along the way, and it's been a great experience of me working here. And you know, we like to call ourselves a single platform for all your testing. We offer a range of products for web testing, so Live for manual interactive cross-browser testing, Automate for automated web testing, and Percy for visual testing and review. And also on the mobile application testing front, Live's counterpart is App Live, so for manual interactive mobile app testing, and App Automate for your automated mobile app testing. We also have a couple of free tools, Screenshots, which lets you see how cross-browser compatibility of your website is on different devices, Responsive, which helps you test the responsiveness of your website design, and Speed Lab, which helps you checking your performance of your website. We have over 6 million registered users. Our platform runs over 72 billion Selenium commands a year. That's crazy. And users from 135 different countries. And in order to make sure that all of that runs and works, we have 19 globally distributed DCs. So that's a bit about ourselves. Today, we're here to talk about the BrowserStack SDK. So what is the BrowserStack SDK? The BrowserStack SDK is a plug-and-play solution to run your test suite on the BrowserStack cloud with zero code changes. This means you bring your tests as is, and with just one setup and config file, you're good to go. Your tests will just run on the cloud. It's magic. And Ali will be showing this for us kindly today. And what this basically does is, you install the SDK, you set up a configuration file, and then the tests work. And people can focus on writing the tests and getting the testing done. And we've even made advanced features on our platform super easy. So things like local testing and parallelization and test orchestration become super easy because of the SDK. So Ali, do you want to maybe talk about why we built the SDK?
Sure, Vignesh. I think it all started with the vision that our founders laid on us around developer friction. As a company, we believe in onboarding developers with zero friction. And the Automate integration journey was one of those aspects that we really looked at deeply. We did over 6 to 8 months of research, saw different setups, learned the different kind of frameworks that people were creating. If you notice even in the previous slide, developing a Selenium-based framework is quite a creative process. And we've seen customers creating different variants and different styles on how they want to set things up internally, which works perfectly for their use case. But moment you want to try or do a POC with a cloud vendor like BrowserStack, you have different kind of changes that need to be made. And for us, the biggest problem was that we wanted customers to see the value of BrowserStack immediately, not in hours, not in days, but immediately. Can I run your entire test suite on 3 combinations on our browser and device cloud? So that's the reason why we set out building a plug-and-play solution that will help abstract the biggest teething changes that we saw. Or a central project in which you can't really make changes that easily, and also when you have legacy setups, so even making the slightest changes has a lot of consequences. So we wanted to have a solution which will not touch any of your existing code, but let you try out BrowserStack and works and coexist with your existing setup. So that was one of the biggest motivating factors. The second one was the connecting your test suite also means connecting your environment, connecting your where your application is hosted. In enterprise setups, these are behind private environments, so you can't access them. So traditionally, you'd have to install our BrowserStack local tunnel and connect BrowserStack with your application infrastructure. This was also a teething area for users because this is an alien application. You don't know much about it, and you have to follow the steps. So we wanted to abstract that out. And the third piece was the effort taken to set up your framework to run in parallel. Right? Every framework works differently on how you do cross-browser testing and how you run threads in parallel. The SDK is an attempt at abstracting that out and giving you a very simple interface to scale up your tests on BrowserStack.
That sounds awesome, Ali. So can you tell us about the process of building it, though? How did you sort of narrow down on this being the exact solution that you wanted to pursue and build?
Sure. I think this is just the first, I would say the first iteration of the problems we identified, because we saw this as the initial pain points or the pain that pressing needs that our customers had. We solved them. As we learn and as we get more feedback, we'll probably enhance the offering much more and try to resolve or reduce the other friction areas that go around in this automation journey.
Awesome. And what about the technical challenges about building it for like the curious ones who want to know how this actually works? Like, how does the magic come together?
So I think the first challenge for us was how do we override existing code without having users to make any changes? I think first it's a mindset that we had to imbibe that, okay, we don't want our customers to take any effort and zero friction, right? Typically, you would say that, hey, you just have to make few changes, few lines of code, just change your WebDriver from local to remote or change the URL. But the first piece for us was to accept that as at a mindset level. And then second was the technical challenge, right? How do we go ahead and make these changes without them having doing anything? It's just something that just installs and works. That was the first challenge. The second challenge was integrating into different runners. Whether you're running TestNG or whether you're running Mocha.js or Jest or Robot, all of these runners have their own nuances and their own way of running. And what we have done is that we've integrated with each of them and try to give an interface which is standardized across. So even if you have a setup, which we've also seen customers who have multiple frameworks in the same project. Recently, we saw a project which had Cucumber.js and Mocha.js in the same project, and they were running side by side. So we also wanted to solve that you don't have to worry about the nuances of how Cucumber and Mocha work, because there are differences. And the SDK handles that. So those were the other challenges we solved.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that, really. And that last point you just mentioned, right, about people using multiple frameworks. I think we saw evidence of that right now, right? With that Slido poll, we had people say various and multiple. So that's awesome. I think one last thing before we get into the demo, like, have you heard any customer feedback yet? What are the things that people have said?
Sure. I think two sets of customer feedback that I can talk about. The first one is we saw a setup where the customer was trying the traditional approach, and they made few changes and they were able to make their tests run on BrowserStack. However, they were stuck with parallelism. This was with TestNG. The way the TestNG XML was written, they were not able to achieve the parallelism goals. So we asked them to install the SDK and just set up the configuration in the YML file that the SDK has, and they were immediately able to see the value. Right? Not that you cannot do this with TestNG, but just that the ease that we bring in, that you don't have to worry about, because we know the exact use case that you want. So we've made an opinionated framework that will help you achieve those use cases. So that was one. And the other one was around the setup which in which local wasn't configured correctly. So BrowserStack local, there were the customers facing issues with how to set it up, how to start it, how to stop it, and installing the SDK just abstracted the whole thing out. You don't even need to worry about the local tunnel. It all happens under the hood. All you need to do is set a flag that local is true, and the tunnel gets established automatically.
Awesome. I think we've kept everyone from the demo for long enough. So Ali, I'm gonna let you share your screen and show people what we've built.
Sure. I'll start with the sample that I have here with me. I am a JS dev, so I'm showing a Mocha.js based test suite. What I have here with me is a project, a very simple project that has an add to cart, login test, and page load test Selenium scripts. The driver is initialized at the top of the page. I'm using Chrome driver. So as you can see, there is no reference of BrowserStack over here. This is your typical Selenium web driver using Chrome driver. And in the described block, I am opening BStack demo, which is our website. And there's some selectors here to test whether the product is adding to cart or not, right? Similarly, the other tests are also on the same lines, right? What I'm now going to do is go to our integration guide and show how I can add the BrowserStack SDK to the setup. So here I have our Automate dashboard. This is the integration guide for Node.js Mocha. I'm going to start by copying the installation commands. This command will install the SDK, and the setup command will set the YML and make the necessary changes for this test suite to run on BrowserStack. Let me copy them.
Also, for anyone who isn't a BrowserStack user already, this is the screen you will see when you sign up and you start trying to integrate your test suite. So you'll find it waiting for you when you sign up.
So this is happening in real time. We're waiting for the installation to happen. So I'll talk about what's going to happen when this completes. Okay, here it's completed. There are two things that have happened. One, there is a YAML file that got auto-generated with my username and access key, so you don't have to copy-paste that. The setup command had it in the arguments. This is a pre-generated YAML file which sets a sample project name, sets a build name. This is what you use to identify your executions. An identifier, we auto-generate a number. We have different expressions that you can use, build number, date, time. So you can just pass those. And that's how you can format your executions on the BrowserStack dashboard. And here is how you can define different OS browser combinations. So we have a platform key. You can get this from our capabilities generator or SDK configuration generator. There are 3 set here by default, but you can grow this to how many of the combinations you desire. I'll come to the rest of the config later. I'll try and show you what the other changes are, and then we can deep dive on the config. The second change that the SDK has done is it took my existing scripts and created new scripts and prefixed the BrowserStack Node SDK to it. So if you notice, there are 3 entries with the SDK. So before the SDK was installed, there were these 3 which run locally. So this is how you can now run the same test suite on BrowserStack, or you can run it locally. So I'm going to go ahead and run this sample test BrowserStack. What's going to happen is that it's going to pick up the config from the YAML file. And because the YAML file has 3 platforms configured, it's going to run the one test into on these 3 combinations. Let's take a look on the BrowserStack dashboard. You see 4 because I've been running the demo test before the call, make sure things are fine. So as you can see, the execution happened on BrowserStack. Let's take a look at one of them. The SDK automatically sends test context to BrowserStack. So if you notice, the name says bstack's cart functionality can add items to cart. This is the combination of the describe and it of that spec file. Additionally, we also mark the test as passed or failed. So this is based on the assertion that is part of the test script. So the reporting on BrowserStack happens automatically. If there were exceptions, maybe I can run a different one to show you how that would look. But if there are exceptions, it starts showing up on our video timeline, and you could see them visually. Do you want to do that now or later?
No, I think this is great, Ali. I think just one question actually we've got in the chat, which I think is would be great to bring up right now is Harshita, who's asked. You said there are no code changes required with the SDK. I think you've answered this already, but if you could just double click, how things work before it, what sort of code changes customers had to do, and how have we changed that, just so they can connect the dots.
Sure. Let me show you. Since I was on Node.js, let me stick to that. I'll show it to you for. I think I'll take. We have a better flow here. So the changes that you would have to make before this was, the first change would be to your WebDriver. If you're using local WebDriver or pointing to a local Selenium grid, you would have to change the URL to BrowserStack. Typically, we've seen customers want to maintain the ability to run on BrowserStack and locally. So you would have to write some kind of scaffolding or if condition to run on BrowserStack or run locally. The second one would be to set the BrowserStack local tunnel if you have a use case to test a website that's behind a private environment. So whether it's a locally hosted website or in your staging environment or anything which is not publicly accessible. In order to run this on BrowserStack, you would have two options. One is the language bindings, which is a dependency that you install, and you have to manually manage the lifecycle of this application, which meant that you would have to write some code like this, where you would start PS local, and then you start it, and then you stop it at the end of execution. So these were code changes that you would have to do. The other way of doing this was running a binary and make sure that the binary is running before you start your test suite and it stopped after you run it. This is useful if you don't want to make any code changes, but then you have to be comfortable on managing this from your command line or in your Jenkins, where you start this and end it appropriately. So with the SDK, you don't need to worry about this. You just pass a flag saying BrowserStack local true, and the SDK will hook into the execution lifecycle and make things work on the code. The third thing is how you set capabilities. So if you notice, there are two tabs here. There is Selenium for W3C and Selenium 3. When you set these capabilities, one thing that you have to note is that all the new Selenium versions expect Selenium 4 formatted capabilities, and you have a distinction between Selenium approved W3C capabilities and the ones which are vendor specific, which go under VStack options. So you would have to ensure that you're passing these correctly, where certain capabilities would go outside and certain capabilities go inside. In our documentation, to make this a little simpler, what we've done is that we've put everything inside VStack options, because we make these, we honor them inside. But we've seen a lot of confusion on what goes at root level and what goes inside the VStack options. And if you're using Selenium 3, then you would have to stick to this, because a mismatch of these protocols causes some of the other issues depending on the Selenium client binding that you have. With the SDK, you don't have to worry about this. We handle this under the hood. You can give us whatever capability, whether it's Selenium, whether it's JSON wire protocol or W3C, and we handle that abstraction.
Thanks for that. Just to clarify, like essentially we've made it sort of super abstracted. They just, regardless of what kind of capabilities they've written, it just works. Our YAML file.
Yep, that's at least the vision. If there are sometimes issues around it, we identify them and fix them, because there are complications when Appium kicks in. Because Appium has its own Appium options on top of so you have BrowserStack options and Appium options. We're trying our best to give a very intuitive and a flat interface. So you just put in the name of the capability and we auto prefix it under the hood and figure out what goes where when it hits our server.
Awesome.
Should I move on?
Yeah, we can move on. Harshita, I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, the other piece that you'll notice is that from a reporting perspective, things like build, like the numbers that you see here, you have to handle this yourself if you're not using the SDK. You would have to write some logic to generate an incremental build number or a date timestamp, so that you can split the execution on BrowserStack. Otherwise, what would happen is all your executions would get grouped into one build, because that's the string that we use to as an identifier. After this, you would have to then also mark your test manually as pass or fail, right? You would have to use the after hooks of your framework and then call this line of code, whether this is a JS executor, custom executor that we've written as an API interface within the test script itself to mark it pass or fail. And then you can also give a reason. As you notice with the SDK, things got marked automatically because we hook into the framework itself, and if the assertion passes, we mark it as passed. The
Awesome. I
debugging
think that
capability.
answers a couple of questions in chat as well, because they've asked, where do we write the assertion in the code for getting the session status passed or failed? So you're saying that as long as the test case itself has an assertion, we're going to automatically handle that.
Right. The prerequisite for the SDK to work with is that we are assuming that your current test framework has a test report and has some assertion logic built into it. If you have a custom framework which does not have any assertions written on it, then you would have to write that code anyway, because there is no report even without BrowserStack that gets generated. But let's say you're using something like Mocha or Jest on the JS side, or even WebDriver.io. If you have some kind of assertion, we hook into that and take that as a source of truth.
Awesome. I hope that answers a few questions in the chat.
Any other questions you want me to answer now? Should we?
I'm just quickly scrolling through. So I think we're good. We can keep going, Ali. Do you want to perhaps, now that we've got the basics out of the way, do you want to maybe go into some sort of deeper aspects of how once they've got it set up, they can then users can start becoming power users and unlocking more of the platform?
Sure. I think what I'd like to talk about is this key called parallels per platform. In my previous execution, I ran one test, which was test_cart on 3 combinations. So 3 threads were used on BrowserStack. Now what I'll do is I'll run a sample suite. This sample suite will run everything which has test_. So that's these 3 tests, right? And instead of running them, and instead of using 3 threads, we'll use 9. So this parallels per platform acts like a multiplier. So it'll run 3 tests per platform. So if I've got 3 over here and I have 3 tests, essentially I'm going to use 9 threads on BrowserStack. So I'd like to show that to you and show you how fast the execution happens, because you'll see the eventual build time. So when I come to the BrowserStack dashboard, you're going to see only 5 at a time, just because of the queue that's being utilized right now. The demo account I'm using has 5. So what's happened is that it's utilized all of 5, and then it's queuing one of them, and then the queue, as the execution completes, then it moves on. So yeah, I think it's almost done. I'll show you the difference in the execution time. The previous one took 20 seconds, and this was just one test on 3 combinations. Now I've run 3 combinations and 3 tests, right? So that's a total of 9 sessions, and it's completed in 39 seconds. So that's the power of parallelism that was immediately accessible by running on BrowserStack. If you could visualize this, if you have hundreds or thousands of tests and you'd like to run them on multiple combinations, you can utilize our parallel concurrency factor and really speed things up.
And Ali, just to maybe double click there, without the SDK, how did they go about sort of setting up these parallels per platforms?
There are multiple. Okay, I'll tell you one way. At a high level, what you would need to do is, if you are using something like Mocha, and you want to set up CVT, you would have to set up some kind of base class and maintain a loop over each of your tests, and then run it on them. So you would have to maintain your own config file, which has these 3 combinations, for example, right? You would have to make this, if this multiplier, if you would like, you can maintain this, and then set up a separate base class in the before all hook of Mocha, and then run each of these tests. It's doable, but it requires some amount of tinkering, and I think also you need a lot of clarity on how your existing framework is. So usually I've seen that folks who are the creators of their frameworks are able to do it, But moment this gets handed over to a different team or a different person, these things are not very well documented on how inheritances are working or how classes are defined. So it becomes a little difficult and a lot of trial and error.
I see. Yeah, for sure. I think test suites and in general code bases get handed around all the time. So something as simple as a one-liner in a YAML file can definitely sort of simplify that for people. Thanks for showing us this. Are there any other sort of advanced features of the BrowserStack platform that you maybe want to talk about? I think I know you spoke about local testing, but we do have a couple of questions in the chat. And
Sure.
if you can maybe explain how simple it is to get started with local testing using the SDK, that would be nice to hear.
Sure. So my config file already had BrowserStack localist true. What I'll do is I'll show you this test. This test is a ping test for BS local 45454. What BS local 45454 is just a alias to localhost. We set this up to circumvent certain limitations on iOS where localhost is not accessible, but you could consider BS local as localhost. So I'm going to run this test.
Ali, just so people know what's happening, can you like talk us through as it runs?
Sure. What the test did was it tried to open BS local 45454. This is hosted. This is hosted locally on my machine. If that's not very clear, I could probably run localhost and show you the same. But this probably local. No, I don't think it will work from browser. But this server runs. And if you're able to access this from BrowserStack, it shows that the connection is made between BrowserStack servers and your locally hosted website.
Got it. So just one flag and that was handled. And I think you showed us the documentation earlier as well, where you had to open the connection and then close it in the test script itself. So that's awesome.
I could, if that's not clear, I could run this thing again and change this to localhost and see if that should work. Right, so this is so I've changed the URL to 127.0.0.1 just to make it super explicit.
Sure.
Yep, this works. Let me show you the video again. So if you see this session, this is localhost. So this is my local host, but it is being accessed from a remote machine, which is BrowserStack's Edge browser in a remote data center.
Awesome. That's super cool. I mean, yeah, just one flag and it worked. I think you spent more time explaining it than actually getting it to work, Ali, which is awesome. And I hope everyone who who asked questions about local and tunneling had their question answered.
Great.
So I think Let me just quickly go through.
Sure. Let me show you, I think, how do you configure this YML file? There are two ways of doing this. If you come on our dashboard and you use our quick integration guide, in the integrator test suite section, you will have, there is a mini config generator here. So this allows you to select any of the browser or device combinations that you'd like. Right? Whatever you select over here gets updated on the right. For representational purposes, this is 3, but you could always change it and keep adding it at your end. You could take 3 and then change 3 more, and then you can keep copying it into your config. These are the other attributes around the SDK that make it simple for you to toggle and just copy this config. The other way you could do it is by going to our SDK config generator. You can open this in isolation, and it pretty much works the same way. Apart from what's shown over here, you can always pass in any W3C or JSON wire capabilities at the root level of the YAML, and it will identify it as a capability. So anything which worked as a capability earlier, if you put it in the YAML, it will work with the SDK as well. And you have 2 options on how you can apply these capabilities. If you put it at a root level, it will apply to all the combinations. But if you apply it within one of the platform's object, it will apply only for that particular platform.
Got it. So I see.
Would you like me to cover any other features or any other aspects? Or?
No, I think this was super helpful. Maybe if you could just like scroll through the builder, just give people the opportunity to perhaps digest it. So just talk through it. So I think at the top you had the access keys, the usernames, and configuring the browsers, and like you said,
right,
you can switch them around and keep adding more and more, as many as you need.
Yeah, you can also set these as environment variables. It's not called out here, but that's something we support. And even if you do not set the username access key and you set the environment variable, then things will work. So if anybody's worried about security concerns of committing keys, you know, this is just for your convenience so that you always have access to it. Followed by the platforms object. This is you can define how many other objects you'd like. The way our orchestration works is that we create one thread for each combination that is listed, minimum. And if you increase the value of parallels per platform, then it will run more tests for each combination.
Right. That's what you just showed us with the build time reduction a short while earlier.
In terms of debugging capabilities and other BrowserStack capabilities like IP geolocation or network simulation, they'll work as is. You just need to add them here. And depending on your account type, if you have because IP geolocation is for enterprise customers only. If you have access to it, then it will work the way it used to.
Awesome. Awesome. Is there anything else you'd like to cover early on the builder, or do you want to move on to the next part of the work?
We could talk about, I think we covered the configuration file. We covered, I think there's, if anybody's wondering what if I pass capabilities in my code as well as in the YAML file, we have a merging logic and we apply an order of precedence when duplicate capabilities are detected. So if you have set some capability in your script or in your own config, and then also in the BrowserStack YAML, the BrowserStack YAML capabilities get considered to run on BrowserStack.
Great. So I think we've got a lot of like sort of under the hood questions, which we will deal with in another couple of minutes, just for everyone who's put in questions. Thank you for asking. So why don't we, in the interest of time, Ali, just we'll have a couple of things. We'll go over a couple of things and then we can get into Q&A. Does that sound good to you?
Sure, but I'll answer one frequently asked question and things that we're working on making more evident. The BrowserStack YAML file. So at the time of execution, you need to pass one file. Today, if you have use cases of defining multiple files, what you can do is you can make different files. And at the time of execution, you could just renamed one of them to BrowserStack.yaml. However, we were creating arguments, which is part of our pipeline and should be done by the end of the month, where when you execute, by default, it will pick up BrowserStack.yaml. But if you have different config files at different levels, you could just pass the file path as an argument or an environment variable, and we'll pick that instead.
Awesome. You definitely preempted a question there, Ali, because I think people did ask that. So thank you for that.
Sure.
Okay, so I think one question is, what's the vision for the SDK? You said that this is just the first iteration. Can you talk about what's to come for people as they start adopting? What can they see in the long term with this?
Sure. I think two parts to it, right? The immediate roadmap and the overall vision. From the immediate roadmap point of view, we're looking to add more and more frameworks and languages. C# is something that we're working on and hoping to release by the end of this quarter. More frameworks within C# will follow after that, NUnit, XUnit, MS Test, adding more coverage on Python. We're evaluating and taking more feedback if we need to build for other languages as well on the Selenium side. After that, we're also working on native app and Appium. So the way the SDK works for Automate, we're making the same problems. Everything gets replicated for App Automate as well. We've got some requests around that because we have customers who are using the SDK for Automate, but then have to use a manual integration for App Automate. So they really feel the pain in that setup. So we're cognizant of that, and we're working as hard as we can to make sure that we have it released. It's not as, since there's a technical audience here, probably appreciate that the Appium capabilities on top of W3C are not as straightforward as Selenium. So we have to do a lot of handling at our end to ensure that Appium : gets prefixed correctly and added at the right side, and because otherwise the Appium server will reject those. Especially for Node.js, there is no official Appium client. So it's the user's responsibility to generate capabilities that have Appium : prefixed correctly. So on Appium documentation, you probably see a capability called app, but under the hood, it gets translated to Appium : app. So those are the nuances around Appium testing.
I see.
So that's the immediate roadmap and the larger vision. I think the SDK will continue to reduce friction. I think we'll identify more cases, maybe execution scenarios. One of the aspects we're evaluating is that if you're running a test script which works fine on Chrome, how can we make it work on all the other platforms that we support without you having to make any changes at your end? There is enough. Selenium has reached a set of maturity, but the Selenium and Appium intercompatibility of commands, that's something that we're trying to see if we can help out, or we can automatically correct or heal those test scripts. That's one avenue. The other avenues are on the other new products that we're building at BrowserStack, right? We have two products in alpha. You may notice on the BrowserStack dashboard that you see something called observability. The observability is a tool that is based on the SDK, because the SDK is able to build and send a lot of insights that can help you with your test reporting, execution, monitoring, and debugging. So yep, that's the way forward. I think there are a lot of other products that we're building that are not announced yet, and the SDK would be a single onboarding or single interface for our customers to install and then get access to all these products.
Awesome. I think that's super exciting for someone like me as well. As we scale up and as we start doing more things along the testing journey for our customers, they just have one interface to work with our products. That's awesome to hear. And also around the other things you mentioned around, write it for Chrome and make it work across the board. So it's not just about test setup, but across the board, every single time they run a test. So that's awesome. So I think we've got about 10-15 minutes for a quick Q&A session. We've got a lot of questions, by the way. So thank you to everyone who's been sending in questions. I'm going to have a tough job to just pick up ones that we can answer. And if we don't answer it live, we will make sure that we get back to you in some form, either through a blog or we'll try and reach out to you or connect you with our customer engineering team who can help out. So I think one question that does keep coming up, Ali, is what about existing customers of BrowserStack? Uh, the existing way that they've written their tests or they've integrated with us, will it still work? And should they move?
For any integration that is working, if it's not broken, then don't. There's nothing to be fixed, right? However, if you are facing challenges and an SDK can solve one of those, then I guess that's when the recommendation would come in from our side. Unless you're also looking to explore our new products, that's where the SDK would help out, because it would be the easiest way to adopt any of those new products that we're building out. You would not have to do any manual integrations with them. You could just install the SDK and get access to them.
Awesome. I think another question which has come up quite often is, will it work for apps as well? I think you've answered this earlier, but do you want to just reiterate? What do you see in terms of SDK and app testing support?
Yep, we're planning on launching Appium SDKs for App Automate. By the end of the quarter, we should have at least a few frameworks out. That's at least that's the visibility I have. But in the longer run, if we just go from 3 to 6 months, we should have every framework that is listed on BrowserStack's website with Appium support will have an SDK.
Incredible. Awesome. Another question around how does the SDK handle retries of failed tests? If a test fails and then passes, will the BrowserStack build show a failed build due to the one failed test?
So retry handling, there are two parts to this. If your framework is already doing retries, the SDK doesn't come in the picture, because the execution is getting passed through and the SDK is sending that to BrowserStack. Now on the BrowserStack side, how do we identify retries and reruns? That's something that we don't currently do on the Automate dashboard, but if you check out observability, they've built in additional intelligence to identify if a test was retried thrice. So what they would do is they would show you the latest attempt and not the previous ones. Previous ones would get archived. So the SDK itself does not do reruns, but if your framework does it, we pass that through. In terms of a feature request, we've gotten a couple of requests so far that can the SDK also behave like a framework itself? Can it do retries, or can it grow into generating reports automatically? We're evaluating these requests and taking a call whether we want to grow the SDK into a full-fledged framework or not.
I see. Awesome. Yeah, and I think just for anyone here who's going to check out the SDK, please do reach out to us. So Ali and his team can build on these and take in your feedback. And your questions are all feedback for us as well. So thank you. Going through a couple of different questions. I think some of these are very BrowserStack specific, but how can we programmatically obtain the session and URL for test run video?
Sounds like application logic to me. I'm not sure if the SDK would have any role to play here, but if I understand the question correctly, you want to write a test case which obtains the URL. So you're doing a get URL of sorts.
I think it's more along the lines of maybe like the API, if they want to get the video afterwards.
Oh,
the session ID and then the URL. Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, we have a REST API. That's something that we expose. We are also, that's something I forgot to mention, that it's a part of our SDK roadmap to even include the REST APIs. It's not in our public roadmap yet, so I don't have a timeline to commit. But yeah, we'll consolidate these endpoints. So today, if you'd want to do it, you can check out our REST APIs and pass in the session ID, which you get during the session. And you can obtain all the information that is available on the dashboard through the API.
Awesome. I think one question around, when it comes to mobile, are we able to have multiple devices for running tests, or all tests need to be run on one device configuration?
So it all depends on the number of combinations that you mentioned. I think the satisfying conditions are that you have enough parallel threads purchased, and yeah, the devices that you mentioned are valid, so it should execute. There's no restriction that the SDK sets that you can only run on one device at a time.
Awesome, yeah, and I think if I can piggyback off that too, Ali, I think people have, like, on our platform, typically run hundreds of tests across different mobiles devices at the same time. So if you have use cases and you want to expand your coverage, then BrowserStack is your playground. A couple of questions around integrating with GitLab. How or in general, like, maybe we can take this a step back. How does the SDK sort of and the YAML sort of setup play with other CI/CD providers, and how can people bring this into their pipeline?
SDKs currently does not interfere with the CI/CD integration, but it does give you some additional features that it honors. So in terms of environment variables, so it makes things simpler. We have plugins for CIs, for popular CIs we've created. So Jenkins, we have a plugin. For GitLab, we don't have a plugin yet, but we're getting requests. We're evaluating that for our Q1 roadmap for next year. If we get enough, then we'll make that. However, the role that the SDK plays on the CI side is very limited right now. You just have to run the same execution command that you are running locally on the CI. And if you want to pass certain context, we have a list of environment variables that the SDK can listen to and behave accordingly.
Got it. Yeah, I think that answers a bunch of different questions around. We had a few around Azure DevOps and GitLab and integrating those. So it's an answer for everyone, I hope. I think this is an interesting question here. Can we use the SDK right now just for starting and stopping BrowserStack local for Appium or Python tests? Right now, they have to start and stop in tests like you showed us in the documentation earlier. They say that it's not available for App Automate, but can they use the local feature just for tunnel creation in the interim?
Technically, yes. So if they're an existing customer, then we'll reach out and we'll probably help you with some hidden flags that will disable everything else and will only make local work for you.
Awesome, thanks. So yeah, please reach out to us. I think there are a few, I think, very operational questions which are in the chat. I'm not sure if we will be able to cover all of them just due to the time we have available. But if your question hasn't been answered and it's a general BrowserStack, how do I get this to work kind of question, please do just head to our website and get in the chat or raise a question to customer support, and they will get back to you pretty soon and answer your query so you can get your tests running on the platform. I think a few folks asking for the documentation links, which we will be sharing. I am just going through, so just give me a minute. Yeah, I think, will we be able to use the SDK with Playwright is one question I keep saying. And what about the SDK with Cypress?
Sure. Playwright is part of Q1 roadmap for 2023. We will have the SDK in. For Cypress, we're evaluating how do we work with the Cypress framework and reduce some friction. We have identified there's a delta on running tests on BrowserStack locally. Running tests on Cypress locally and then shifting them to BrowserStack, where we're evaluating that and figuring out the best way to improve that.
Awesome. Yeah. And there's a question here about, can we add the server hub URL in the YAML as a variable?
I'm not sure what the use case here is, because the SDK automatically, if you trigger the BrowserStack execution, if you trigger the execution using the SDK, it automatically changes the hub URL to BrowserStack. So because it is the BrowserStack SDK, that's the only hub URL you can set.
Awesome. And I'm guessing, as you explained earlier, if they've already got something set up for their local tests, right, that would continue to work as is. So
Yes, correct.
so they don't need to go ahead and reconfigure server hub URLs at all. They can just install the SDK, and then when they run with that flag, it just works.
Yes, so depending on the SDK for Java and for Node, the way to execute slightly differs. With Node, it's the npm run, so it's pretty straightforward in the package.json. In the Java world, depending whether you're using Maven or Gradle or using the IDE, you can toggle the execution of the SDK. Similarly for Python and eventually for C#.
Got it. I think a few different questions, Ali, around I think IDEs, people asking if we integrate with IDEs or if we offer an IDE, because you were demonstrating with a different IDE. So
right. What the approach we've taken right now is taking popular IDs for each language and make a frictionless integration with them. So for Maven and for Eclipse and IntelliJ, we do support an IDE flow. It's on our documentation where you check out Java or TestNG or JUnit or Cucumber, whichever framework you have. You will find an Eclipse and IntelliJ flows to make it simple. We've taken screenshots step by step to show you how you can install and run tests on BrowserStack using these IDs.
Awesome. Another interesting question here. They can see that on one of the documentation pages for Java, they have to run with an argument pointing to a jar file, and they're saying that they don't check in the jars to the repo. So can they state the SDK and the dependencies to pull from Maven Central and then include that programmatically?
Yes, so they can check out the TestNG documentation, which uses the Surefire plugin, and that with that you can install, you can call it in the POM XML and add it as an outline. The Java documentation currently assumes that you don't have any of the Surefire plugins installed, which is why there is a reference path to the jars. So if you have any equivalent of the Surefire plugins, you can reference it in the POM XML, install it as a dependency, and make sure that it's called in the outline.
Awesome, thank you. And I think one last question, Ali, around the different kind of frameworks supported. I think I'm just going to bundle all of these questions. Some people asking for Python, some people asking for Java. Can you just talk about what's available right now and how they can find out if their framework supports the SDK right now or not?
Sure. The master list of all the frameworks is in our documentation. When you go through our documentation, depending on the framework that you have, when you go to integrate your test suite, if you see that link, you'll typically see two flows, one which says automatic and manual, and the other one which is which does not reference anything around the BrowserStack SDK. That's the current way of identifying it. It's in a state of transition as we add more coverage. The second thing I'd like to call out is on the Node.js side, the SDK works for frameworks that are not end-to-end in nature. So what I mean by that is WebDriver IO, Nightwatch, CodeCept.js. These are end-to-end frameworks that handle and abstract Selenium WebDrivers within the framework itself. There was no need for us to create another application for calling it an SDK. So what we have done for these frameworks is that we have done tight integrations within the frameworks itself. So if you are a WebDriver IO customer, the BrowserStack service is the SDK equivalent. It supports the same configuration and solves the same problems. For Nightwatch, we have a deep integration with Nightwatch, and we also have a BrowserStack plugin that we've recently launched. For CodeCept, what we're doing is we're relying on the WebDriver IO service, which also works with CodeCept, because CodeCept is another abstraction on top of WebDriver IO.
Awesome, thanks, Ali. And yeah, I mean, to everyone who's who's attended, we'll try and send out some of that documentation so you have access to it, you know exactly where to go. And like Ali mentioned, you can find exactly what you're looking for and how you can start running your tests in BrowserStack, or set up the SDK if you'd like. I think that's it. We're almost out of time. So a big thank you